What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we got a good one. We have Matt Harmon on the channel to talk about these rookie wide receivers. We're going to pick his brain on who he thinks are the must-draft receivers in this class, along with the best landing spots in terms of rookie wide receiver to scheme fit. Because on this channel, we've talked about these rookie receivers in a vacuum to this point. You know, who has the good yards per out run or who looks good here, but once we get into the nitty gritty of the Z and flanker and the X receiver, I like to pick Matt's brain here on how these pieces actually fit in the puzzle of these NFL offense. How are you doing today, Matt?
Yeah, when you need the nitty gritty, this guy should be a Z receiver this 30% of the time. And, you know, how is he going to line up here, this, that, or the other? That's what I'm here for, man. The alignment dork in chief. That's my job. So I'm excited to talk about this class. It's a really interesting group, Ron, there's so many different types, and now it's like almost easier and yet harder to think about how they're going to project now that we have some of their landing spots. So it should be a good conversation here, man.
Yeah, and I want to start it off up top with your guy, who I think kind of fits into that mold of like, it was interesting before the combine. We'll talk about KC Concepcion first. He is, he crushes all the RP stuff. I reference your site all the time. Of course, Matt Harmon works on his site, Reception Perception. It's an awesome tool. Make sure you check it out. And KC Concepcion crushed everything. And I think what we were concerned about at first, like as someone that, you watch him in college football and 40 rush attempts as a freshman. Is he is he Wan'Dale Robinson? And then he weighs in at, 5'11", 195 plus pounds, and he kills all these RP metrics. How do you kind of see him translating, especially in this Cleveland Browns offense where it's a little tricky? Like we don't know. Todd Monken comes in. It's fresh slate. Jerry Jeudy's there from the past regime. How do you like KC's fit there?
Yeah, just going back to what you said at the beginning about KC Concepcion, like I've started now charting prospects, earlier than ever. I'm actually thinking about like bumping it up even earlier, this coming season, just because, people love the prospect stuff. Everybody loves the draft. But so I typically start looking at these guys like in this year, like early January, getting like a good base across the class. I think I had looked at at least done half samples, if not, partial samples for about like 12 to 13 guys going to the combine, which for me is definitely ahead of schedule. And the guy that I was just like, oh man, this player is so good is KC Concepcion. But I was, definitely like you, I hope this is not another, Elijah Moore, if you want to go for a guy that like I definitely fell for, from that like explosive, small separation type player. But to me, the thing that, so obviously again, seeing what he weighed in at the combine was good, just because some coaching staffs, like it's going to be a non-negotiable that a guy that small is not going to play in anything except the slot, and I think there's some merit to that for a lot of different reasons. But for a guy that's pushing closer to 200 pounds and 6 feet, like I think you've got some wiggle room there. So I thought that was an important box for him to check. Plus the fact that, unlike a player like Elijah Moore or even a guy who I think has certainly been a better NFL player and I think is in line for a bigger year this year than last year, a guy like Josh Downs, you saw KC Concepcion line up all over the place at Texas A&M in his final year. In his game sample for reception perception, he was only in the slot on 29% of his snaps. He was on the ball plenty, a true on the line of scrimmage player for 55.3% of his sampled snaps. So like you saw him take snaps at the X receiver position and just absolutely smoke press man coverage. He's the best press beater in this class to me, 92nd percentile success rate versus man coverage. He gets open at all three levels. You mentioned he's an elite separator. Now, there's other holes in his prospect profile for sure, as we're talking about like catching the football consistently. That's something that he does have to do. To me, though, that's like kind of the last box I want you to check. I know that sounds crazy to like, oh, he's got to catch the football, but we're talking about a player who's dropped, 7-8 passes a season. To me, like 7-8 plays does not define a player, especially when from a scouting standpoint, you see him make high degree of difficulty catches. He has the fourth best contested catch rate among the prospects that I charted, which I know that almost like irritates fans more sometimes to see a guy who drops the easy ones but makes the hard ones. It's like, oh, why can't you just do that all the time? But I for a guy that checks every other box, those players are not going to fall out of the league or fail because of drops. It might just be something that limits their ceiling. It also is something that I think he can get corrected in the league. And we just know that drops are not the stickiest stat in the world. So to me, like, that's not that big of a deal. I had a pretty good sense he was going to go to Cleveland. It just seemed very likely that he was going to be their target there. So it made a lot of sense in order for him to go there. And I know obviously the quarterback situation we can talk about, that's troubling, but I'm a big Todd Monken fan. Like, I think the way that the hiring process went down, and you tell me if you agree or disagree with this, I think the way the hiring process went down for Cleveland and just kind of how messy it was and some of the other rumored candidates there and the Jim Schwartz of it all really kind of masked the fact that, you know, just despite the fact that Monken is 60 years old and doesn't come off of the Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, this is one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. And he's had a lot of success at different levels of football. He's had a ton of success with a ton of different quarterbacks. So I think him going to this landing spot, and, you know, obviously some people compare him to Zay Flowers, KC Concepcion. I think he's more of like kind of something along the lines of Jaden Reed to Stephon Diggs, somewhere on that spectrum. So I guess you could say that Flowers might be within that archetype as well. Since we've seen him get the most out of a player like that, I think that's good for KC. Obviously, again, the quarterback situation is a hurdle. They took Denzel Boston in the second round as well. I think those guys can make a nice, fun pairing. But what you got to hope for if you're a KC guy like myself is that we see him, you know, creatively and interestingly deployed in year one with Todd Monken. And then, you know, they figure out their quarterback position next year, or, you know, Shedeur Sanders against all odds shocks the world. I think that those would be your two hopes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not holding my breath on Shedeur.
Me either.
But I agree. Where I do a weekly video during the season called the Rookie Receiver Report, where I highlight the rookie receivers' yards per out run, targets per out run, PFF grade. And if Concepcion can just, I know it's nerdy, but like we're seeing it with Luther Burden, where that is his profile right now, right? You of course, you have on one end, it's the yards. It's like there was no production there. On the other hand, it's like, oh my God, when he was on the field, he was a monster. If Concepcion can just flash some efficiency, some target earning, and then we get some QB optimism in 2027, I think it's wheels all the way up. I do want to pick your brain. I did see a guy I'm a big fan of, Max Toscano, is now writing for Reception Perception.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of see, I guess, like the chess pieces overlapping of like Jerry Jeudy, Concepcion? I know Jerry Jeudy is like tough to take seriously right now. Yeah. It's like, you know, he's kind of like the old guard. Like, he's honestly somebody that wouldn't shock me if he got traded at some point. But Harold Fannin, you have Concepcion, and there's a little bit of overlap there in terms of like out of the slot and off the line. How do you kind of see that shaking itself out?
Yeah. On Jerry Jeudy, I've never been the biggest fan of Jerry Jeudy. Like, I always thought he was very overrated as a route runner. He's just like not my type of receiver. He is, if we have the Jordan Tyson conversation, he's like the worst version of that type of player, where it's all the exaggerated quick twitch movements that people mistake as good route running, but like that stuff's for Instagram. It's not for the NFL field. And that's why you especially see a guy like Jerry Jeudy be this very volatile player. He's been in bad situations before too, but he's also made situations worse, including last year. I mean, obviously he dealt with some bad quarterback play. He also just was a kind of a mess of a player last year. And that's after he had a great season the year prior in 2024. Some of that, again, not all his fault. I also didn't love how he was deployed last year. I actually think he could be Jerry Jeudy better deployed with these two rookies here, but that's kind of a different level of conversation. I also, by the way, like he's making now on a per year basis, you know, Romeo Dobbs, Wan'Dale Robinson money. So, yeah. I mean, they're not paying him that much relative to what they're probably expecting from him, which is not, I don't care what they say, not to be a bell cow receiver, whatever that means, but to be someone that is a starting receiver in their offense. Yeah. I've had a lot of conversations with Max about this, and this is just generally along my thoughts when it comes to tight ends and wide receivers and everything. Most NFL offenses don't run through the tight end. It's very, very rare that happens. I mean, even a guy like Trey McBride last year, who was awesome and was super productive. I talked with Trey McBride after the season and kind of went through like, how did he have this monster year? And like, oh, are they really designing even he's like, I wasn't the first read on a lot of those plays. You know, it's like, that's just not how most NFL offenses want to run. So typically we see a guy like Harold Fannin, and this is no shot on Fannin, who I think is an awesome player. Those are usually the first guys that become vulnerable to wide receivers being added into the mix here. And you just look at the wide receiver room in Cleveland last year, beyond Jeudy, who was like a mess in his own right. Isaiah Bond played a ton of snaps for them, and they signed that guy in August because of legal issues that he had during the draft process. So I just think the target competition for a guy like Fannin is going to go up this year, because not only do I love Concepcion, I really like Denzel Boston too, and I think those guys can kind of be a little bit interchangeable in terms of their pre-snap alignment.
Yeah, I like Boston. I didn't expect to like Boston as much as I do right now in terms of like at cost, but
yeah,
I like what Monken's cooking up. And you make a good point. Like, even when you sort of like sort by yards per out run, like Kincaid among receivers and tight ends, third in yards per out run, but there's just like such a I find the tight end stuff so fascinating, where it's like he's still not more useful than a wide receiver most of the time. So then he gets typecast, like, you know what I mean? He's like a situational pass catcher. And you're right. Like, I was a big Fannin guy last year. It's a little spooky with Fannin, but I do want to move to our next receiver, who you said landed in an awesome spot. And I honestly agree, who does have some Jerry Jeudy to him, in Jordyn Tyson. And I'm curious kind of like what your concerns are there in terms of the Jeudy stuff, and then how he fits in this Kellen Moore offense.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I think he's a better player than Jerry Jeudy, and I think he will be a better player than Jerry Jeudy. I think Judy's like the bottom of this spectrum of wide receiver.
He was awesome at Alabama for his.
He was
maybe his sophomore year. He was. I remember he was so good, man. I don't know what happened.
No doubt. No, he just is there's a lot going on there. But I mean, I just think this archetype of receiver that is very quick twitch and all that stuff, but isn't necessarily consistently right and tight on the fundamentals. They're very volatile players. I mean, this is the same school comp, and it's actually my Jordyn Tyson comp is Amari Cooper. And he was like this too, where, and you line up like Amari Cooper's 10 best routes in an NFL season, you're like, oh my, and this would happen on social media all the time. It's like, oh my God, this guy's the best route runner in the NFL. But you watch him on a route by route, play by play basis, which is obviously what I do with reception perception. There's a lot of volatility in there. And if you ever had Amari Cooper in fantasy, he was always like an up and down producer, always an up and down producer, and a guy that needed this right specific role to have success. And even talking with people that coached Amari Cooper early in his career, when the Raiders took him, and this will relate back to Jordyn Tyson, when the Raiders took him as a top 5 pick, and they also signed Michael Crabtree, they sat there and said like, oh, Amari Cooper needs to be our X receiver because he's a big body, and we took him in the top 5. Like, that's your number 1, that's your X receiver. And Amari Cooper was very up and down when playing in that role. At the very end of his Raiders tenure, he moves into the Z receiver position, and then that continued into Dallas, and he had a ton of success in Dallas as that move off-ball Z receiver who would kick into the slot. And that's sort of my thing with Jordyn Tyson, is that pre-draft, a lot of parts of his profile really worried me as if he was going to be asked to play as that kind of like static X receiver, because he's 6'2", over 200 pounds, has some of the weird, like shortest arms you're going to see for a guy of his frame, which is something I did kind of like obsess about in the draft process. But regardless, like you look at a player that, he does have the fluidity. He's the best zone beater in the class, number 1 in success rate versus zone coverage, not just from this class, but he's got a top 5 mark since 2021 among Power 5 receivers that I've charted. Like, he is a very, very good, both at finding the open holes in zone coverage, but also you look at his route chart, out routes, dig routes that just put your foot in the ground and explode out of the break. Don't do a lot of dancing. He is really, really good in those routes, particularly against zone coverage, but not great in contested situations consistently, not great against press coverage consistently. That does worry you for a guy who's going to be a boundary X receiver. But he goes to New Orleans, where I just did a breakdown on this for my YouTube channel. Like, it's an ideal fit for a guy that needs this level of role catering, because nobody on the Saints roster last year at the wide receiver position took more than 68% of their snaps outside. Chris Olave, the number 1 receiver, 61% snaps out wide. Because of how much motion they do, they were number 1 in pre-snap motion from a drop back perspective. They were 8th in terms of any motion, like during the snap, any of that stuff. They were 8th. They were a top 5 team in terms of 3 receiver sets last year, 3+ receivers on the field. That just allows you to get all these guys into favorable situations. I think that's really good news for Jordyn Tyson, in addition to the fact that Tyson's 2 best routes, as I mentioned, out routes, dig routes. When Chris Olave was playing with Spencer Rattler early in the year last year, he was really good kind of on the quicker outbreakers. They had a really good chemistry there, but they didn't have much connection over the intermediate middle of the field. Shuck gets in there and he is ripping that ball over the middle of the field. So that's good news on the digs for Tyson. Not to mention on outbreaking routes, Tyler Shuck had like a 72% completion rate on out routes and flat routes last year, which is also really good for Jordyn Tyson, because to me, that's like his best stuff. So I think the fit overlaps at the quarterback. I think the fit overlaps in Kellen Moore's offense. It's a well-designed unit there in New Orleans. So Tyson went from a guy that I had some concerns about pre-draft, and I'm not going to say I have 0 concerns about some of the things in his profile. That would be kind of disingenuous. But those concerns are a little bit lessened going into a team like New Orleans that spreads the field and give these guys favorable matchups via motion and everything like that.
Yeah, and they were cooking last year. You say like 3 wide receiver sets a bunch, and a lot of that was like Mason Tipton, and they trade for Devon Vele because it was such a need. So Tyson's going to be a huge upgrade. And it's funny, like we're talking Dynasty here. Like last year, none of us were really interested in Tyler Shuck, and he might be a guy. We'll see. And this offense, like of course, the motions and the efficiency you get off of that is awesome, but also Kellen Moore's like up-tempo offense is awesome too. They were 11th in plays per game last year, 1st in seconds per snap, 2nd in no huddle rate. So you're getting a high volume of plays. You're getting guys in motion. So I agree that like Tyson's an interesting profile, especially like, like the lack of the yak. And he was definitely one guy that was like very finicky in terms of where he went, but he went to the perfect spot. You have anything to add?
I just think him and Olave are a really good tandem too. Olave can do kind of the hard big boy wide receiver stuff, even though he's not the biggest dude in the world. Again, it's kind of funnier. Like Olave is the more slighter player, but he's significantly better against press man coverage because he's just a much, much better technician. And he was a great technician coming into the NFL out of Ohio State, and he's remained that player in the NFL. For Tyson, maybe he can get there in time, but that almost allows like, hey, you have Olave to do kind of the hard big boy stuff, and then Jordyn Tyson get a lot more of that role catering. So I think that's also a pretty big feather in his cap in terms of this landing spot.
I do want to ask, like, is there anybody that he reminds you of in terms of like this flanker receiver? You said like perimeter, he can play X, but probably going to be off the line. But like zone specialist, like I hate ever throwing out like Debo, because I wouldn't say that's obviously not him after the catch, but
yeah,
in terms of like seeing the chart, like, win rate percentile zone, he's awesome at, and then like press and man, like not as good. But I assume if he dials in some of the route stuff, maybe he can, work on that and become more of a complete receiver. But that is something that's like spooky to me, where it's like really good against zone. Everything else is like a little bit weirder,
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny if you look at his reception perception, like just the success rates. He does look a little bit like a Jahan Dotson type, but like Dotson, they weren't similar players in terms of the build and everything like that. A little bit maybe like a Emeka Ibuka as well, if we're talking about a guy last year who, is definitely more of like a zone beater, less so against man coverage. But Tyson, I do think, has more twitch to him, whereas Ibuka is probably a more powerful player. So those would probably be the guys I would say if you look through like the RP database that he reminds you of a little bit. Even maybe I think he's a better prospect than this guy, but like Matthew Golden last year is a guy that was, zone beater, but a little bit less so against press man. But again, Jordyn Tyson, I just think with him, like because he's got the fluidity and because you do see like the high moments, you almost just hope he can dial it in from a consistency perspective. It's so funny. I'm sure you heard this a lot like during the draft process, but it's like, oh man, he was coached by an former NFL receiver, Hines Ward. Like we didn't play like Hines Ward at all. He kind of plays like his brother, which is to say he plays like a basketball player, which is like kind of a a pro and a con if we're talking about wide receivers in a way. So yeah, he does kind of have a weird profile, which admittedly for me was why I was a little bit like skeptical of him. And I'm not going to say I have no skepticism left. I do have some skepticism left in terms of his ability to reach the ceiling, not to mention the fact we haven't even talked about the injuries. And that's another thing too, that I also do definitely want to note that like his 2024 charting was better than his 2025 charting. I think because 2025, he's playing with that hamstring injury a lot, which I guess you can kind of take two different ways. One, it's like, oh, if he's the player he was in 24, great. He's definitely a better prospect than what he showed in 25, but is he also already a diminishing version of himself because he's constantly dealing with these soft tissue injuries? So he's a risky bet because of those injuries and like, what will he be in 3 to 4 years? But there's also a lot of upside there, and I do like him going to this Saints spot.
I do want to add before we move on, I do like in terms of like your methodology, you have like a note at the top here. You use games from both 2024 and 2025. That's one thing, not to step on the toes of any like a film-based guys, but I feel like there's a lot of draft guys who they don't watch college football. The season wraps up for college football, and then they're only scouting the 2025 stuff. That's why I think like whole other conversation, but like Nick Singleton gets, everybody hates Nick Singleton, but his 2024 was awesome. So I do think it's a good note to use a sample from like a couple of different seasons to kind of see what you're working with.
I think it just depends on the player. Certain guys, you definitely want to try to just get that most recent, especially if that most recent season is their best season. But for a player like this, I did think it would well, number one, also just like available games too, because he didn't play as many games as you want last year. So you almost kind of have to dip back into it. But then if you're going to do that, you want to try to make it even in terms of the data that is available, which is why I always say with reception perception, like I'm not a data provider. I'm not like, I'm more, it's a content tool. It's not a data providing thing where like, oh, this is every single snap that he took in his collegiate football career. Obviously that's not what this is. But then also it's important to remember too, when you're doing like and this was the first year I launched the site was the 2021 draft. So dealing with like all the COVID stuff, this was really nonsensical. But when you go back and look at some of like Jamar Chase's prospect profile, it's like there were some notes that were like, okay, well, this isn't one of the best profiles of all time. I still had him ranked as the second best prospect I've charted since 2021. Because you got to remember, he was 19 years old. He was 19 years old when he put up that RP profile where he was running vertical routes at an obnoxious rate and like truly playing big boy wide receiver. So it's just context with all of this stuff really, really does matter a lot. And it goes a long way.
Someone I wanted to pick your brain on. This is where we kind of move into, we'll call these like Matt Harmon sleepers that end up in good spots. Tell me about Antonio Williams. I like Antonio Williams. He's another guy where you need some context where like Clemson's, they were pretty brutal last year. Mm-hmm. Williams was awesome as a freshman, and I don't think anyone needs to go all the way back to the freshman tape, but he gets a really nice spot with Washington. They have a new offensive coordinator in David Blau. How do you kind of see what this offense like? We don't really have much to go off of with him and just what this fit looks like, but I am excited about Antonio Williams.
Yeah, first on the offense, I'm really intrigued by this Commanders team this year just because it's on the surface, right? They make this massive promotion of David Blau, who was the assistant quarterback coach under Cliff Kingsbury the last couple of years. He also played under Cliff Kingsbury. He did play some games in Arizona. Started a couple games. But he originally got his roots back with the Lions and then returned to Detroit at the end of his career. And at the original point when he was with Detroit, that was all through like Ben Johnson's rise up the coaching ranks from like tight end coach and pass game coordinator, all that stuff. People forget like Ben Johnson was actually on that coaching staff before Dan Campbell got there, and they kept him around because they had some history together. But I think that's instructive because I think that is where David Blau gets a lot of his offensive philosophies and beliefs. And if you just listen to some of the stuff that he and Dan Campbell have said, I think they're going to be under center and like taking play action shots over the middle a lot more than they were under Cliff Kingsbury and more of these heavier condensed sets and things of that nature, which it's hard to be. I mean, they were the most shotgun heavy team in the NFL last year. So it wouldn't be much to skew a little bit in the opposite direction. I'm sure they'll try to blend both worlds, but if they do that, I think there's a way where just the Cliff Kingsbury offense, like it gets your quarterback on base, it gets him started, but I think to take the guy to the next step, you have to see what they can do in more of a traditional pro style offense, which is, I think Jaden Daniels can handle that. And I think it's going to be a pretty cool partnership with him and David Blau. Again, obviously all that's my theories, but based on just some of the things that him and Dan Quinn have said, I think you can kind of read into it in that way. And in that frame, like, I do think Antonio Williams, 5'11", 187 pounds, like probably more slot mostly, but I don't think he has to be slot only in that way. Pretty solid success rate versus man coverage, 75th percentile success rate versus man. Now he's definitely in that bucket of receivers of the, Matt Harmon fell for it again variety in terms of like a smaller separation based slot heavy player. So I tried to remain a little bit measured talking about Antonio Williams this year, but there's no question he goes to a landing spot where I think they can make use of a vertical based slot player, which is, to me, some of Antonio Williams' best stuff. Like, I don't think he is a pop gun slot player where you want to spit the ball out to him and let him pick up yards after the catch. I thought he went down on first contact a ton, but tracked the ball well down the field, good success rates on posts, digs, corners, almost more of that like Christian Kirk type of player, maybe. And when you think about that, like, there's just a ton of available, playing time in this wide receiver room beyond Terry McLaurin. And we know, I think Terry's going to play a more expansive role than what he did in Cliff Kingsbury's offense, where he's just tethered to one side of the field and pretty much running just a vertical route tree. But he still will be the outside vertical X receiver for the most part. And other than that, it's like just a ton of dudes that Antonio Williams can beat out this year. Obviously, we'll see if Brandon Ayuk gets added to the roster, but I mean, nobody was higher on Brandon Ayuk at his peak than me, but
I'm not holding my breath.
I'm not holding my breath. Dude, I was talking about this with James Coe on Reception Perception, the show this week. He was joking that like, oh, Brandon Ayuk hasn't played since the Reagan administration. And not to reference politics here for a second, but like Brandon Ayuk actually literally hasn't played since before the last presidential election. Like it's been a minute since we've seen Brandon Ayuk, and I wouldn't hold my breath on him being a guy that comes to this team, and maybe something happens, but even then, like whenever he gets there, Antonio Williams will already have a lot of runway to have made an impression. So I thought this was a great landing spot for him.
Yeah, me too. I saw you gave him the Sterling Shepard nod of approval in the write-up as well, which is always high praise from Matt. So
from me and me only.
Fan. Yeah, but some people forget who these guys were once upon a time.
Yeah. Pre-injuries, man. If just that's the New York Giants thing. Just receivers that could have been great end up getting hurt. Hopefully it doesn't happen to Malik Neighbors.
I saw one of those. I almost tweeted about it. I saw one of those. Like they have all of the players' numbers blurred out and stuff, and it's like who is this? And it's OBJ, and it's like I miss when OBJ was awesome.
Me too. Me too.
But I do want to pick your brain. So this guy to me is like he is spooky. Elijah Sarratt, right? He goes to the Ravens, and something that you've harped on for a while is these guys who don't flash in the charting, but could maybe expand their role into the big slot. And we've seen that. I believe that would be like Juju. I believe that would be Rashee Rice. How optimistic are we that the Ravens could see Elijah Sarratt like we do and move him inside and kind of let him feast there?
Yeah, if people want more kind of information on that, I did write an article, did a YouTube breakdown for this, and like put an interactive table on the site in the article. So I think people will like that to just see what happens to some of these poor separation wide receivers, because the long and short of it is that most of these guys, the highest percentage in terms of career outcomes is they get cut on their rookie contract. Even if you look at like highly drafted players, most of them, the highest percentage outcome is they get cut on the rookie contract. Now there's another bucket of success, if you want to look at it as success, is like they become these volatile deep threat receivers. I would say that Will Fuller was in this bucket. Kayshon Boutte is a guy in this bucket. Early career Christian Watson was kind of in this bucket as well. Watson, I thought it's kind of tricky because he had his best season last year, but previously was kind of that like volatile deep threat receiver. So I think that's one of the outcomes there. But then the biggest hits are all the guys, as you mentioned, that don't separate well on the perimeter, but are solid zone beaters. Some of them are solid zone beaters in college, and then they get kicked inside because it just makes more sense for their deployment. Even Amon-Ra St. Brown was one of these guys. Perimeter receiver at USC, was a better zone beater than a man beater in RP, and just made so much sense to be a player who kicked inside and was kind of, as I called him at the time, Bud like Cooper Kupp. I think Elijah Sarratt makes a lot of sense to be that guy too, because there's no question. Like, I don't know how you could watch him and not come away with, pretty significant separation concerns in terms of him lining up on the outside. He's also one of these guys that's a skewed alignment prospect where he only lined up on one side of the field and the game's charted for reception perception, which has been another historical red flag. But some of those guys that have beat those odds are Rashid Rice and Juju Smith-Schuster as well. So I'm hoping he's kind of within that bucket of players. And I think that Sarratt, when you look at just the overall success rates, 17th percentile success rate versus man, 14th percentile success rate versus press. I just don't know that he can be a high volume player winning. Like, I know the first thing people said was, well, he's great on these like back shoulder, passes, the tight windows. You got to have the right quarterback to do that. Maybe Lamar Jackson's that quarterback, but we haven't really necessarily seen him work with a guy like that previously. Now he hasn't really had that type of receiver either. Zay Flowers not that guy. Even as somebody that's been high on Rashad Bateman in the past, like he was never a ball winner whatsoever. He's another separation based guy. So I don't know if Lamar is going to be one of those players, but I definitely think when you look at the 81st percentile success rate versus zone coverage and just how smart Elijah Sarratt is and some of like the quick in breakers, deeper out cuts, that's a guy that can, I think, make that transition. Not to mention too, that some of the guys I've tried to do this with before, Keon Coleman, even like a Jaden Higgins type, they're almost like too big to be big slots. But Sarratt, I think, might be just right in terms of like 6'2", a little bit over 200 pounds. Like he probably fits more in that big slot bucket and is more of like a power forward type of player. So I think he makes sense there. Now, whether the Ravens share our vision of that, I think there's two positive indicators here. One is that they drafted Jacoby Lane first, and Jacoby Lane is truly, in my opinion, like a sacrificial X receiver type prospect where if he hits, he would be in that like volatile deep threat bucket because he's another guy that didn't separate well, but has like a tractor beams for hands. He's just got great hands and wins these outrageous catches. So to me, he looks like kind of a sacrificial Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but with better hands, like can actually make plays at the catch point. I think he fits in that bucket. So why would they kind of need two, of these types? I think that makes Sarratt the guy more eligible to kick inside. And then Eric DaCosta at one of the post-draft pressers literally said, we think he's really, really good inside. So I'm hoping that is an indicator that will be his full-time position. And we've seen Declan Doyle with Ben Johnson last year, with Sean Payton previously. It's a couple of coaching staffs that have had success with players like this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like Declan Doyle, these like first hire OCs are always so tricky to kind of. He was with the Bears last year, but like of course Ben Johnson's calling the plays. So I think it will be fun, and he is somebody that I think the upside is too high to not take swings on Elijah Sarratt. Like I'm gonna put you on the spot. I assume if you're in a rookie draft, are you taking Sarratt over Jacoby Lane, even with the draft capital difference?
No question. This is, if you're ever gonna be like a skew against draft capital person, this is the class to do it because. Yeah. Everybody just kind of consensus agreed that it was very much like a flavor based and like, hey, guys are going to go like the third round to the fifth round was a little bit samey in terms of some receivers and everything. So if you're ever going to skew against draft capital, like this would be the year to do it. I have Sarratt ranked in my dynasty rankings, like within the guys who went in day 2. And that's a big bet on like this big slot idea coming to pass. But I do think it's at least worth taking a swing on.
Which I will say, if you want to promo the new rankings tool, which is awesome, where you can like, it's your dynasty rankings, then you can click on like just the rookies or whatever. Like I obviously was skimming through before we hopped on here.
Yeah, new dynasty rankings up at reception perception. Massive upgrade, and 98% of the credit has to go to Zach Miller, who's our web manager there. Nobody knows who Zach is unless you're in the RP bubble, but he definitely deserves all the credit. He actually absolutely crushed it with this tool. But yeah, it's really all sortable. You can see how guys are ranked versus me versus kind of the consensus in terms of like market-based available sources out there. So you can kind of see where like guys I'm higher on versus consensus, things like that, plus individual notes for every player and like my buy and sell designations, which has been funny because there were some guys I'm like, I'm buying this guy. And then the tool points out like, actually I'm like 5 spots lower than consensus or something. So you can kind of weigh those two things, like my sort of subjective beliefs versus what the market is actually telling you. So I think it's a pretty cool tool, and definitely Sarratt is one of those guys that I'm a little bit higher on, not crazy higher on. Plus, like, rookies are still getting, I think, imported to some of these sources. But yeah, Sarratt's definitely somebody I'd be willing to bump up a tier, even though Jacoby Lane was drafted ahead of him. I think it's also worth noting sometimes too, and this is where draft capital can be tricky. Like, sometimes teams view a receiver role as just not also akin to fantasy production. And I think that is kind of a guy like Jacoby Lane who will be better if he hits better for the Ravens than he will be for fantasy managers. Whereas Sarratt, if he hits, he will be useful certainly for both.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I do, I want to pick your brain for a second on, I keep asking this of guests, but it is, I guess it's a little selfish as a Jets fan, but I assume you, of course, you charted Omar Cooper.
Yeah.
I mean, I just find it insane that Omar Cooper was a first-round pick and Elijah Sarratt was a day 3 pick. And it's not to diminish from Omar Cooper, but it's like, because it's not like Omar Cooper is like, if he was a 3-year guy, early declare, and we were projecting out, okay. Yeah. But both of these guys are coming out pretty complete products. And I just don't see the gap. I guess what I'm asking is, like, when you watched Omar Cooper, I guess, do you get it of kind of what the gap is, or maybe just evaluating him in his own vacuum is probably more fair? But how did you view Omar Cooper through the lens of RP?
Well, first of all, for the gap between the two guys, the gap in my rankings pre-draft was definitely and post-draft still, because I'm kind of the believer of the Sarratt, like, big slot path.
And he has Lamar.
That helps. Yeah. And I actually want to kind of ask you about the Jets fit and just some of your thoughts on that. But, like, the gap basically between my pre-draft rankings for these guys was tighter than where it went in terms of draft capital, because I thought Sarratt should have been taken on day 2. Now, I did think Cooper was a late first-round pick, so him going where he went to the Jets was totally fine to me. I thought when we were talking about him as like a top 20 player, even in this class, which is a little watered down, that was kind of much for me. So I think where he went in the draft is totally fine. I think the gap in, like, some evaluators' minds is that Sarratt, we just talked through it. Like, we have to do this sort of, all right, well, he's got to play here. He can't, I don't think he can really play his colleague, which is, by the way, good. I know people wanted to see this happen. I'm glad he didn't get drafted by the Raiders. Like, I don't need him to be. Basically, what he should be doing is what Jack Best should be doing. You know, like, you don't want too many of these, like, big guy, the whole thing. So I am actually kind of glad he didn't get stuck in their, like, perimeter receiver role. So we have to do kind of that with Elijah Sarratt. Whereas with Omar Cooper Jr., I think you watch Omar Cooper Jr. in like 5 seconds, think, okay, I can see where this guy fits into an NFL offense. He has very easy application in terms of, like, even if he's just this, we spit the ball out to him and he gets yards after the catch, he's going to help a football team. I do think there's more growth for him, and, like, he can be more than that. But I think that was, like, the premium that people put on him, is that it's a very easy application profile to an NFL offense. And basically everybody could use we spit the ball out yards after catch machine. Now, I think Omar, again, he can be more than that. I think he's also, by the way, there's another, this is like anecdotal. He's just great character reports. I got to interview and talk with him before the draft, and he was just awesome. Only player ever that's asked me, like, what's my worst graded route and how can I get better? So that was a cool off camera conversation that we had, the two of us. So yeah, I mean, I'm rooting for Omar for sure. The Jets fit is just weird, because I struggle to see how both him and Kenyon Sadiq are going to be full-time players this year. Like, unless they do the thing where, all right, we're in 2 receiver sets, it's 12 personnel, and, like, Garrett's our X and Omar's the Z. And then when we go to 11 personnel, we bring on A.D. Mitchell to be the X and Wilson's the Z, and then Cooper's. But teams don't really do it that way, you know? No. Usually it's just like, who's our X receiver? He actually ends up playing the most snaps. And the guy that has the most X receiver skill set is A.D. Mitchell. And I mean, people are going to be pissed if A.D. Mitchell's playing more snaps than Omar Cooper Jr. or Kenyon Sadiq, but just based on, like, receiver roles, I do think that's live. And I'm sure you feel this as a Jets fan. Maybe you're higher on this than I am, but if it was anybody else other than Frank Reich, like, figuring this out, I might be a little more excited about it.
Yeah, that's why I was on Pete Overzet's stream for the draft, and they take Kenyon Sadiq at 16, and I'm bummed out because he's this unicorn, huge tight end, but get him with somebody you could think, and have the imagination. It kind of shows just like what this team's mindset is when they pass on Arvell Reese, right? They don't see Arvell Reese as like this, what could he be? It's like, how does this guy get us fired? So I don't like it at all. And I hate to like raid on the parade, but I would say AD Mitchell is probably the favorite to like, have more snaps, have more routes run than Omar Cooper. And then so it gets really tough. We're going to get squeezed out for a lot of the, off the ball stuff between him, Sadiq, and they're going to want to get Garrett Wilson in there as well. So
yeah,
I think it was a luxury pick, but that's not a terrible thing. Like, and this is through Homer lenses, but I am pretty pessimistic about them. But I do think it's not going to be the prettiest offense with Frank Reich, but this offensive line is awesome. Like Membu was awesome last year. Tittman, this big interior offensive lineman with like a mullet, he is awesome. And I think like it might be like it not quite that 1 year for Jameis and the Buccaneers, right, where he has like 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, but I could see it being something among those lines where it's like high teens interceptions, like mid-20s touchdowns, and it's not like stone worst offense in football, which I think is probably good for Garrett Wilson, and then everyone else kind of gets squeezed down the rest of the totem pole.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a Jets fan, what I would care about is that like whoever is our 2027 quarterback is going to be pretty well set up.
Exactly.
Like I do think, and the same thing goes with what we talk about with the Browns too, where you kind of have to maybe take your lumps with these guys because it's a little bit crowded. I just think, the tough part for the Jets is, and because we haven't even said Mason Taylor's name too, like they took Mason Taylor last year in the second round. They probably don't want to light that pick on fire just yet. And again, he's 6'5", 250, and I guarantee you he's going to come in heavier than that this year because I bet they've asked him to bulk up in year 2 and be more of the inline guy because Sadiq is that move tight end. So, I mean, Frank Reich, last time we saw him, they played 11 personnel and 87% of the snaps. It was them and the Rams that were the only teams above 77 in 2023. And I doubt it will be as high as 87. The Rams, obviously, too, they do a great job of like blurring 11 and a half, 12 personnel with those big. There wasn't a lot of blurring with Frank Reich's Panthers offense. It was just pretty static, old school stuff. Also, the fact they took Cade Klubnik, who's like an RPO heavy quarterback, makes me think like, okay, Frank is just going to kind of come in here and run that 11 personnel RPO stuff. And if that's true, one of Sadiq or and maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but my fear is that one of Sadiq or Cooper, most likely Sadiq, if we're being honest, is going to get squeezed for snaps.
Yeah, it's going to be like for fantasy, it's going to be frustrating. Like I said, like I think it's Garrett Wilson, it's Bryce, and then you just hope for strong per route metrics in a 2027 quarterback. And I do want to push the conversation to the other New York team. You mentioned Malachi Fields, which is a very similar conversation to the Elijah Sarratt one. He seems again like one of these guys that we want to move inside. It seems like he probably a little bit less clear than Elijah Sarratt, like in terms of conviction. Like it seems like, especially for fantasy purposes, that Sarratt seems a little better suited for that. How do you? Because I got to be honest, like Malachi Fields, he was somebody I think maybe fresh out of the combine where like he was getting like round 2 talk, and then kind of slipped. What'd you see there? Because he's somebody where I don't know, like the Notre Dame passing offense, nobody really popped in terms of the numbers, but what's kind of the sell on Malachi Fields?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure production-based stuff obviously doesn't like Malachi Fields. I've talked about it with JJ Zachariason, who does great work, of course, prospecting with data. And, Fields, I do think the one thing to note with him is that he's a former quarterback. He was like a high school quarterback actually in Charlottesville, Virginia, not far from where I live. He went to UVA as well. A little bit of an older prospect too. So again, I know there's a lot of red flags, and I think we're kind of we're working like a thin margin for error here with a player like Malachi Fields. But at the same time, I do think there's some interesting stuff with him. Now, he was getting like first, second round buzz before the combine, because of course during the combine he ran the 4.6, which is just like, okay, well, you're not going in the second round if you're running a 4.6, unless you're Keon Coleman. And actually I do think there's actually some similarities between Fields and Coleman. The difference is that I just think Fields is a smarter player and is a guy that is going to not have the same work ethic concerns as Keon Coleman. I also think too, he's one of these guys that I think 6'4", 210 plus pounds, like probably too big to be a slot, but could he be kind of like a power Z receiver in the lens of like Michael Pittman? I think that's possible. I also think too, him landing in New York is interesting because he's so good on stop routes, like where he's selling vertical and snaps back to the quarterback. And Jackson Dart loves to throw those like routes to a perimeter receiver, especially a ball winner like Malachi Fields. So I think he could end up anywhere between like, he's a big slot and he's getting a lot of volume. He's a Z receiver who's a good complement to Malik Neighbors, or he's kind of a sacrificial X receiver. And he is making some plays, but is better in real life than fantasy. I think that's very live, but yeah, he's definitely in the bucket of a guy that I don't think can be a high volume receiver on the perimeter consistently. Because of the lack of separation and the lack of ability to get open against man coverage, but really good zone beater, really smart player, obviously has great hands. I do think there's something to Malachi Fields. So in a lot of rookie drafts, like he's going to just get crossed off for people because of the data red flags. I don't think he's the worst like third rounder in the world to take on rookie drafts, especially because the Giants traded up to get him. Like they really like something about him, and maybe that means nothing. Totally open to the fact that it might mean nothing, but I do think he makes sense as a complement long term to Neighbors whenever he's healthy.
I'm also curious, as we talk about the scheme fit, the other New York team has another retread in Matt Nagy at OC, which like
doesn't exactly light your fire, does it?
Yeah, like Harbaugh crushed everything. You know what I mean? Like, because Harbaugh Reese pick was awesome, and then of course, I mean, he gets hired right before that, but then you see the names, and it's like, oh, don't be Greg Roman, and then instead it's Matt Nagy, which is just
and like Greg Roman is on the staff too, by the way.
Yeah, like, so it's just like the band's back together.
I know. Yeah, no, it was pretty clear that Harbaugh believed Todd Monken was going to be his offensive coordinator.
Yep,
which would have been a sweet fit with Jackson Dart. And then he gets the Browns job and they kind of have to pivot, and Matt Nagy was soft fired by the Chiefs. So he was available, and it happened. So yeah, I agree. Like Nagy in that sense is not going to be great for any of these skill position players, but I do think they're going to play a good bit of 12 personnel. They obviously brought in Isaiah Likely. Theo Johnson is there. And you just look at the rest of the wide receivers on that roster. It's a lot of like Darnell Mooney, it's Calvin Austin. They got to be done with Darius Slayton at this point, but maybe not. They always find their way. They're the couple that like they're always about to break up, and then you tell your boy like, oh yeah, dude, get out of that, and then like they end up back together. And you're like, well, what do I say now? That's Darius Slayton with the New York Giants. They can't break up. They never will. They'll be together forever. But you think like they're about to be done with Darius Slayton here, new coaching staff and everything. If you look at Neighbors and who else is going to be on the field in two receiver sets, it probably would be Malachi Fields.
Yeah. And so now this is a warning. Now we're getting to the taxi squad stash area for Matt Harmon. Tell me about Cyrus Allen. Cyrus Allen is somebody that you have pretty high in the rookie rankings among receivers, high relative to the guys who were drafted ahead of him. What do you see at Cyrus Allen? 'Cause I got to be honest, I saw him high in your rankings. I was like, I knew I had him in my spreadsheets. But I can't remember, or no, actually, I'll be honest with you. I don't think he is in my spreadsheets because he didn't get invited to the combine.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So
wasn't invited to the combine.
So who the hell is Cyrus Allen? And why do you like him?
Well, again, definitely in the Matt Harmon fell for it again variety, 100%, 5'11", 180 pounds. But I actually went higher than his teammate, Jeff Caldwell, who was invited to the combine and smoked the combine too, but has a long way to go as a wide receiver. Cyrus Allen was clearly Cincinnati's best receiver, and a lot of people I've talked to that are embedded in the league or have ties is like, was this guy not invited to the combine? It was very strange. So there was generally a lack of confusion about that, if not people thinking outright they dropped the ball on that one, because the film is really nice on Cyrus Allen. So he's in the rookie roundup, which is mini samples, so not full profiles of guys, a little bit smaller samples for these players. That being said, and obviously this is not what you should do, but I'm going to do it anyways. If he had gotten a full profile, his success rate versus man coverage would have ranked third in the class behind KC Concepcion and Carnell Tate. His success rate versus zone would have ranked second behind only Jordyn Tyson. Like, those are three of my top four receivers in the class. Like, that is a pretty good group for him to be in. So no question, the separation is really good. I think I wrote this in my Dynasty the Dynasty rankings tool. The write-up on him was like, you get two beers and me, and I would tell you he's easily the best separator on the Chiefs. And I don't even have 2 beers in me right now. So I guess I said it. Like, I think he could be the best separator in Kansas City. But yeah, he really gets open well, good route running plus explosive ability, wins downfield too. So I don't think he has to be one of those like bunny hop slot receivers. Good solid hands, tracks the football well. So I just think, why not take a shot in this Kansas City wide receiver room that Rashee Rice has his role, which is certainly more valuable in fantasy. And it's kind of a little bit of an issue for Kansas City that they don't have anybody else to beat man coverage. Worthy, we'll see what he's like in year 3. And then it's like Tyquan Thornton and not much else. Like, I do think there's some ability for Cyrus Allen to make some noise. Like, I wasn't a big Jalen Royals fan in last year's class. So I do think there's some opportunity for a deep sleeper like a Cyrus Allen.
This is interesting. I'm trying to figure out where the heck all the passing yards went. Because, like, I mean, Sorsby is doing his own thing right now, but he gets all this money for Texas Tech. And I'm like sorting by receiving yards. And so, like, Cyrus Allen leads him with 674, 13 touchdowns, of course. He gets better yards per out run than Jeff Caldwell. I'll put a revisionist thing here. Anybody who makes it this far. I did a sleepers video yesterday. I had Jeff Caldwell as a taxi squad stash. I'm going to officially swap that for Cyrus Allen. But it's just like, I don't know, the day 3 or the UDFA who gets signed by the Chiefs is always worth like your rookie draft ends and you can put him on your taxi squad, but he's probably nothing. But why not Cyrus Allen?
Jeff Caldwell is totally fine to keep an eye on, because he does have some serious athleticism and can rip it down the field, but he's a guy that like better plays a ton of special teams early on to stick on the roster.
Yeah, he's got to be one of those guys who are willing. Where I think that was back in the day, Equinemius St. Brown. He fell because he refused
to play special teams. And you know what? He's hung around the league now because he's been playing a lot of special teams, actually.
I love it, dude. That's what was I think it was maybe the Eagles last year or something like that. But special teams still gets me fired up to this day. Where I don't know, like a guy, he got like killed on the opening kickoff and then ends up making the I think like a strip. So I also want to your final sleeper here. You have Deion Burks, who's interesting to me as a sicko who plays in some Devy leagues, right, where we're drafting guys out of high school, which is just far too much. He is somebody that the Devy community has loved or maybe not loved, but he's somebody who's gotten like first round buzz maybe the last 2 years. Like going into the college season, it's like, okay, this could be Deion Burks' like breakout. And then it just never really took place. I think he falls to the 7th round because of it seems like health issues is kind of what pushed him there. What'd you see on the tape? Because I think that was it Nate Tice? I know you do a show with him. Does he also like Deion Burks, or was somebody like a football guy in that sphere?
It was Daniel Jeremiah and I did a segment together where we were talking about just receivers that like he was higher on than consensus when his top 150 was going to come out. Cyrus Allen, by the way, was one of them. And then Deion Burks was the other one that he was like, yeah, I just feel like I'm on an island with this guy. I was like, no, me too. Like, I actually kind of like him. He goes in the 7th round, which I thought was shocking. I mean, some of the guys who got drafted ahead of him, man, I don't know. Yeah, like I know there were production-based red flags in Deion Burks' profile. Like I brought him up on JJ Zacharyason's show, and he like laughed me off the laugh me off the show. Now, I mean, he went in the 7th round, so maybe JJ's right and I'm wrong. I wouldn't say, again, like Deion Burks is so good from a perception standpoint that I would be willing to flag plant him, but I'm definitely willing to flag plant. Like, yeah, you went in the 7th round. I'm going to rank him a little bit higher than guys who went in the damn 7th round. Like he just, to me, yeah, there was an arrest in his background too. I don't know if that was something like a DUI. I don't know if that was something about it too, but I haven't done a ton of digging on this. Just I'll try to do some more of that as we go through the process here. But yeah, in terms of the on-field stuff, he's one of the 5 or 6 guys in this class that you talk to evaluators like, oh no, he's way better at Purdue. And like I've seen some of the Purdue stuff. It's like it is actually more real deal receiver work than what he got to do at Oklahoma. And I think that's part of why it's so disappointing from a profile standpoint is that he transfers up, which is a good signal. He transfers up, goes to Oklahoma. And it just never really kind of happened for him from a production standpoint. I do think the quarterback play was very up and down last year, but in isolation, solid zone beater, solid man beater, showed an ability to get downfield. Now, when he went up against LSU, he got kind of demolished by their really good perimeter corners. I don't think Burks at 5'10", 180 pounds can play on the outside, but he could maybe be like a speed Z and slot type of hybrid player. And the Colts have a lot of open opportunity in that wide receiver room, so he's definitely somebody worth keeping an eye on. I liked his ability to get downfield. Really like tough type of player who fought hard back to the football against zone coverage and kept himself open even when the football did not go his way. So yeah, disappointing to see him fall to the 7th round, but someone that I do think is better than that 7th round designation.
Really what it is, and I feel bad for some of these college players, is just timing. He transfers there as soon as Dylan Gabriel leaves, and then he gets Jackson Arnold, who threw for 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns. And then Mateer last year a little better, but 14 touchdowns, 2,800 yards. It's just slim pickings. Now, I do want to shift over to just some interesting landing spots I wanted to pick your brain on here at the end of the show. Let's talk about the wide receiver one. I do just want to ask about Carnell Tate, where I think some people in their heads. First of all, what I'll say is we touched on the draft capital thing earlier. He's not 4th overall good. He's not Jamar Chase good. He's not Marvin Harrison Jr. good. But people do. I think there's some helmet scouting going on where like people sort of feel burned by Marvin Harrison Jr., the big receiver out of Ohio State, and now they're like, I'm not that interested. I'm curious because I was reading his NFL.com. Lance Zierlein has like good write-ups for his players, and I was surprised. I think that Carnell Tate gets typecasted a bit where he's a big perimeter receiver. So people are like, oh, he's the next X, kind of like Marvin Harrison Jr. But it seems like he can play more in that Z, like off the line, a lot more like fluid in his movements. So I'm curious kind of how you're projecting him to the next level in terms of like inside and out. And because you know what I mean? Like he's 6'3", his contested catch ability is awesome, but that's like he's not Marvin Harrison Jr. perimeter X guy.
No, and by the way, I wish Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't so like stuck perimeter X receiver, which I hope he won't be this year.
Stop putting on so much. Stop doing the weight room stuff. Like get in the speed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, get in the agility drills enough already with the curls. I don't know what the curls are going to do helping you at the wide receiver position, but we'll see. Now I do think Harrison will move around more in LaFleur's offense than what we saw previously, but yeah, I think the appealing part about Tate is that he is such a good perimeter receiver. That doesn't mean he has to be an X only player. Obviously, I think from a fantasy standpoint, we kind of don't want our like true number one receivers to be X only. Even think about a guy like Nico Collins, who is legitimately, in my opinion, like a top 5 wide receiver. Sit down and do your rankings. Maybe he falls 6, 7, whatever, but he is within the ballpark of being a top 5 NFL receiver. And his production can be very up and down because he's just tethered outside on the line of scrimmage consistently. Obviously, Harrison is a really exaggerated version of that. At Ohio State, Tate played Z and X because he's across from Jeremiah Smith, which I don't really know how much that moves the needle for me, especially when we had all these fights about the Ohio State receivers previously. And it's like, well, are there any? Well, Garrett Wilson's a 1, Chris Olave's a 1, Jackson Smith-Njigba definitely a 1, and they all played together. It's like, I don't know that really, really matters when we're talking about evaluating some of these guys in isolation. I think that Tate has the skill set to eventually be a 1, but yeah, he's not that like true top 5 receiver prospect. There wasn't a blue chip receiver in this class. There wasn't really a blue chip anything in this class beyond Fernando Mendoza and obviously Jeremiah Love at his position, which is just a little bit weird because it's running back. So yeah, I think that Tate was a good pick by the Titans. The Titans perimeter receivers last year were just terrible. 32nd in yards per reception, one of the worst contested catch rates, one of the worst drop rates. To me, there's a lot of upside here for somebody to walk in and be a day one impact perimeter receiver, which Tate can be. I don't think he has to be consistently the X, but I would guess just looking at the rest of their room, he is probably, unless they want to make Alec Iomanor like a pure sacrificial player, I would guess he probably profiles the best from a press man coverage standpoint to be the X receiver.
Yeah, and something I didn't think about until just now, he's obviously not Malik Neighbors, but I did love how Brian Dable just sort of immediately knew, like, okay, Malik Neighbors is our best guy. Let's get him a 35% target share. It wouldn't shock. Not that Tate's going to get there, but no. I assume Dable is going to want to use Tate a ton right away, which is, I think, obviously a positive. Like he is not one of these guys who's going to like spread it around and hockey shifts or whatever. Like it's just like we drafted this guy 4th overall. He's going to get the ball. We're going to put him in spots to succeed.
Yeah, he does a lot in terms of moving players around and getting them in those advantageous situations. I joked at times during Malik Neighbors' rookie year, which was legitimately awesome. Like, this isn't to say anything to take anything away from Malik Neighbors, but I was like, man, the Giants aren't even running an NFL offense. They're running like a Malik Neighbors fantasy usage scam. Like, just finding ways to get him the ball over and over again. And I mean, you look at the rest of the receivers on the depth chart. One of them, of course, was Wan'Dale Robinson, who was better last year in New York than he was that rookie year with the Giants. But, nevertheless, like, I think that it will be hey, one guy here deserves a ton of targets, and that should be Carnell Tate.
Yeah. And if you're into the nerdy stuff, ESPN projections, Mike Clay, he's got Carnell Tate as like a top 24 wide receiver out of the box, and he's known as like a very conservative projector. I do want to where are we at on Dezhaun Stribling? Huge conversation point. He gets reached on here. I think you had a good tweet where I'm all for dunking on Kyle Shanahan, right? The Joe Williams pick is hilarious. The Kalon Black pick is also now hilarious. But like the idea that his minions give him cut up tapes, like that's how it works in the NFL. Like these aren't highlights on YouTube. It's all 22. It's probably like a 20-minute long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's called like delegation.
Highlight tape. People think he's like watching YouTube highlights. That's not it. Plus, like, oh my God, he's not watching prospects till February. Yeah, the 49ers are usually like one of the last teams that are playing. You think he's watching? You think he's grinding? Ole Miss tape in January or December when they're playing football games? That's how it works. I mean, even in the clip, Shanahan said that's what John and his staff are doing all year is looking at players and stuff. It's one of those things. Like if you run a business and you run an organization, obviously Kyle trusts himself and he makes the final calls for these things, but the other people in the building, you have to at least have some respect for that they're putting together a good cut up of players and telling you which players to watch. Like it is very much we do always want to make it about like one person, but it is very much a group effort. So that's like a total side rant. I mean, it's weird that Stribling has become like almost a culture war on the internet.
Yeah.
Like it's
very much
every day I see, I mean, even hopefully they don't watch this, but even the company I work for, there's like a new quote graphic about Stribling every day. It's like, enough already. Like, what are like, who cares? The tough thing, and I said this on a video I just did on my channel, like the thing with Stribling is like, okay, I thought he was a good day 2 pick. They made him the first day 2 pick. That's a little bit more difficult for me. That was like, well, not a little more difficult for me to defend. But I do think people that view Stribling as like a guy that was going to be a 4th or 5th round player just weren't paying attention towards the end of the process. Like he was going, Dane Brugler had the quote that he was going to go in the top 64. It just was a matter of how high. He turns out very high. Jeremiah said, I think it was on air on my show, if not us talking afterwards, that he was going to go in the 2nd round most likely. This isn't out of nowhere. Like Kyle Shanahan is just like other people are defending Shanahan. There were people that viewed him this way. And I said this before the draft. So this is on record that the reason Stribling was going to go higher than people thought is because of exactly what we just talked about. The coaches get involved in the process last. And this guy is a coach's favorite wide receiver. He's a coach catnip player because he can play all 3 receiver positions. He blocks his ass off, not in the like, and he does do this too, the performative, like, George Pickens backside, like smokes a guy and it has nothing to do with the play. Stribling is also like condensed he's in the backfield on snaps blocking too, like, which I know nobody's like, oh my God, it's receiver blocking, but it does matter a decent bit. Plus he's got what I would call 2
wide receiver sets. Like when we talk about like Josh Downs and stuff, like I love the guy, but he's not doing any of that. You know what I mean?
But he's not doing any of that stuff. And then, you're not available when they're running play action. Like I think there's a chance when they go to heavier personnel packages, Stribling might be the guy, like the one receiver, the single receiver in like 13 personnel or 22 personnel, which they run because they have Kyle Juszczyk there. So, man, like he's going to play a lot as a rookie because he can block. And like he also has a promising set of release moves. I'm never going to tell you he's all the way there as a route runner. He does have some work to do, but he works the middle of the field well. Like his best routes are slants and digs, which, it sounds like a 49ers receiver to me. So again, a guy that would I have taken him at 33 ahead of Denzel Boston? No. But would I have, taken him on day 2 somewhere? Yeah, sure. And, he ends up going to a good landing spot for a team that's going to want to get the most out of him. So definitely, I think a guy that I wouldn't just like laugh at the pick and write him off. I'm not saying for sure he's going to work out. Like he's by no means a sure thing, but the weird culture war around him at this point is very strange. But I guess they kind of were asking for it.
I hate what it's made me become, because I'm usually the nerd who's like, all right, I'm not really interested in this guy. And then in a weak class where we're like debating Nick Singleton, which I like Nick Singleton, but we're debating a day 3 running back or even Jonah Coleman at the 1-2 turn. And you're going to tell me like Dezhaun, I drafted him at the, I showed in the video I posted the other day, I drafted Dezhaun Stribling at the 305 in a rookie draft, which is
that's
just
crazy.
Like, it's like he went 33rd overall. Like at a certain point, you have to put your pride to the side and just be like, all right. And there's almost like this added element where I almost think that Shanahan's going to want to prove everybody wrong and actually get him to work and use him.
I mean, Ayuk was a guy like this too that was I think the spreadsheet.
People forget about that.
Yeah,
he was disrespect in those rookie drafts. Like he was probably even behind, like, not that it really mattered. Like T. Higgins was awesome, but he was definitely one of those guys where it's like, I don't really want Ayuk.
Yep. And I mean, obviously had an up and down career in San Francisco, but when he was locked in, he was all the way locked in. And I think Stribling and Pearsall can be a pretty good 1-2 punch, here pretty soon. So yeah, if this was like, I don't know, the damn Browns took him 33rd overall, which I know they literally took Denzel Boston a little bit later. That'd be one thing, but I mean, yeah, this is 49ers. Like it's a pretty good landing spot with a lot of opportunity on that wide receiver room. And even if he just ends up becoming Juwan Jennings, like that would be a pretty big win.
I agree. I also think, I mean, you touched on it. The 83.3% success rate on Diggs is awesome for what like Brock Purdy is trying to do over the middle and anticipation throws. I do want to throw a question out there. This is the last one I got for you. Who has the clearer path to make a difference as an X receiver, Ted Hurst or Bryce Lance in those offenses? Where it seems like, I mean, you kind of look on paper, Olave and Tyson more, the fun receivers, right?
Yep.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about round 3, round 4 receivers that are probably going to be the sacrificial X in their offense. But who do you like better between those two guys?
It's so funny. I almost did like a true breakdown player comparison between the two for my YouTube channel. I just ran out of gas before the draft. I was like, I can't talk about these guys anymore. I did obviously have videos on them, but I think that they're, in a weird way, like the reason I wanted to compare the two is that I think they're both, like perimeter X receiver candidates, but their route trees are so different that it's almost difficult to compare. And that Lance is more of a vertical player for sure. Like he is better on the just stretch the defense out, go routes and stuff like that. He does need to clean up his catch technique. Like he makes a lot of contested catches on film, but it's all like underhand, lets the ball into his body. Like he does have that stuff. He's got to get fixed. Even a player I really like Roma Dunze has gotten into a bad habit of doing that in the NFL, whereas he didn't do that in college, which is really frustrating. But anyways, like that's something he does have to clean up. Does Bryce Lance. I like Ted Hurst overall better. I think that Lance could see the field sooner though, because he does stand out as kind of even a little bit, sacrificial X receiver to start out, but a guy that can play and stretch the defense out. And eventually you're just taking a shot with him. Ted Hurst, though, is more of like a slasher receiver where his routes are the ones that break over the middle of the field, horizontal stuff, as opposed to just straight go routes. And I mean, you do look at that Bucs receiver room right now. I just finished Emeka Egbuka for year 2 charting.
Oh, hell yeah.
That's going to be out May 11th. So obviously coming up next, man, like Egbuka just had to play so much boundary on ball receiver. And like, that's not who he was at Ohio State. And I don't think that's who he should be in the NFL. They do kind of need that body type to emerge, because it's not really Jalen McMillan, who's a skinny speed receiver. Chris Godwin obviously is not that guy. So like there is definitely more opportunity than you would think for Ted Hurst, but I just think he projects more as a slasher, which is kind of the route tree that they had Mike Evans running anyways towards the last couple of years. And I think they're going to keep it within the same offensive kind of tree, bringing in Zach Robinson, who was with the Rams when Liam Cohen was as well. So I think they're going to kind of keep it to that sort of stuff. So if I'm betting between the two, I think Hurst has the higher upside, but it wouldn't shock me if like Lance is on the field a little earlier because he stands out from those receivers.
Yeah, because we're talking, in terms of perimeter guy, again, like Mason Tipton, who I had to like look up who he was last year when I put him into my spreadsheets for the rookie receiver report. But
Mason
I
Tipton,
do like that call.
Bub Means, and
Bub
the other
Means.
The other guys on the roster too, like
A.T.
Devon
Perry.
Bailey's a big slot, and Jalen Polk is like see if he's even on the team, but him and Tyler Shuck are fishing together, so they got the fishing narrative going. But yeah, he's not a guy that should be the Patriots for whatever reason made Jalen Polk a perimeter vertical X receiver, and we saw how that went in his rookie year. So yeah, there is kind of an opening for clearly that type of guy.
Yeah, I like both as well. Like you said, like they can just there's a clear path. Even though like you look at the Bucs receiver room, you're like it looks a little crowded, but for that specific role, it definitely is wide open. But that is all I have for you today. I appreciate the time as always, Matt. Let people know where they can find you, what you got going on. I will definitely be looking forward to the year 2 receivers article.
Yeah, receptionperception.com mentioned a lot of the stuff up there already. Every player profile we've talked about here, they've got a full profile up, route charts, data, everything, plus the dynasty rankings. I think people will really like the new tool where you can kind of see where I have these guys versus consensus. So really good actionable way to use those rankings. So I appreciate this conversation as always, Ron. And you didn't call me Unk this time, which you did in the preseason show last year. And obviously that has haunted me to this day, as I look at myself in the mirror getting older and older. So I appreciate you having me back as always.
Of course, I just got to bring up, Sterling Shepard, and we got to just drop some.
It was implied. Yeah, it was implied when you're like, yeah, the Sterling Shepard comp.
Which, that's only going to age as we go here.
That's right.
But I appreciate everyone that watched this video. This is the RS Dynasty channel. Make sure you're subscribed, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, I surround my body like I'm frozen.